What happens when a professional wrestling match breaks down into a real act of violence? When a wrestler, in the heat of the moment or as a planned act of revenge, gives their opponent one of the industry's oldest, darkest secrets, known as the receipt. The unfortunate truth is nothing. It's an established practice in the industry. That is, until a landmark case in 2021 that changed British law and potentially the future of wrestling around the world. I'm Ollie Davis, and this is the story of when a wrestler was sent to prison for a wrestling move. A couple of miles north of Bournemouth, on England's south coast, sits a small patch of grass wedged between a secondary school, a cycle path, and a row of houses. There, shaded by some trees, is a nondescript scout hut, just like hundreds of others around the country. But just a month before the pandemic shut the independent wrestling business down, this totally ordinary hall was the site of an industry-shaking story. On Saturday, 8th of February 2020, inside the Scout Hut at Cherry Grove, Ferndown, 33-year-old British wrestler Jiving J. Knox was scheduled to have a match at an indie show. Knox's original opponent was unable to make the event though, so one of Knox's own trainees, a 32-year-old man called Rob Wilson, was drafted in as a last-minute replacement. So far, so like the scores of independent wrestling shows that run up and down the country every week, until Knox appeared to kick Wilson full force in the face. Before you go any further, please be warned that we'll be discussing and showing graphic imagery of assault. One of Wilson's friends was filming the match at ringside because Wilson wanted to show the match to his family afterwards. The footage, which was later released by Dorset Police, shows a hardcore match between the two, where Wilson appears to kick Knox in the back and then drops down for a pin attempt. Riley aggressively kicks out, leaps to his feet, and while Wilson is still on his knees, delivers the stiff kick to his face. Wilson immediately goes down, but then the match seems to get back to its pro wrestling plan. Knox attempts to pile drive Wilson onto some debris, but it gets countered into a back body drop. Wilson goes for a near fall, but Knox hits him with a swinging fisherman's neckbreaker. The two men are seemingly cooperating with each other again, and the footage ends with a masked man entering the ring to attack Knox with a pile driver. It finishes seeming like a totally normal wrestling match, but that kick to the face proved to be far too real. Wilson had to be helped backstage, where he later collapsed. It wouldn't be until he was taken to hospital that the married father of two understood the full extent of his injuries. He had suffered a fractured jaw, eye socket, nose, and teeth. Mr. Wilson later said, "I had concerns going into the match, but I trusted that he was going to call it in the ring and it was going to be okay. The assault was a result of his prior instruction. He was down on the floor, and because I was the antagonist, he said to me I should stay on top of him when he was down. I caught him with a kick to the gut area. He hissed at me, 'receipt', which is terminology for payback. I positioned myself on my hands and knees, and I was expecting him to hit me on the back, but instead he kicked me in the face as if taking a goal kick in football. It was the worst pain I had experienced in my life. My face just exploded, and I realized it was a lot more than a broken nose. Blood was coming out like a fountain, and the canvas was red. I could hear the audience yelling to stop the fight." Wilson's family called the police, and Knox, whose real name is James Riley, was subsequently charged with a criminal offence. Upon further review of the evidence, Bournemouth police believed they had enough to present the case to the Crown Prosecution Service in hopes of a trial. The CPS agreed that the evidence was sufficient, and a tentative date was set at Bournemouth Crown Court. The ramifications of that trial could shake the global professional wrestling industry to its core, because if Knox was found guilty, one of wrestling's oldest, darkest forms of discipline would become a jailable offence. A wrestler could go to prison if they gave someone a receipt. Wrestling might appear as a semi-respectable mainstream business these days, with multi-billion-dollar TV rights deals, publicly traded companies, and its biggest stars taking over your favourite movie franchises, but its roots are in the carnivals. For the majority of its existence, pro wrestling has been about tricking people into believing what they see is real. That meant, much like the magic circle, the industry was extremely protective about who they let in. And once you were in, you had to follow its often unspoken code of secrecy. This might be why wrestling has always slipped through the cracks of regulation where other sports and forms of entertainment have been caught. Because, in lieu of government bodies, unions, or basic HR practices, wrestling has a community that governs itself outside of the law, with its own code of right and wrong enforced by tough guys who appoint themselves as its vigilantes. There are practices like Wrestler's Court, where a locker room leader, famously The Undertaker in 90s and noughties WWE, would act as a judge over disputes. There's hazing, an intensive bullying process designed to weed out the weak, like how The Miz was forced to change in the Hall for the first 7 months of his career. And, of course, the receipt, where if you hit your opponent too hard in a match, whether deliberately, recklessly, or just clumsily, they are entitled to respond at some point in the future by hitting you back with a hard shot of their own. One of the most vicious examples of the receipt is former ECW wrestler New Jack and what he did to his opponent, Vic Grimes. Grimes had injured New Jack in a botched spot, so 2 years later, New Jack tased him and threw him off a 40-foot scaffold above the ring straight to the arena floor, where he suffered numerous injuries, including a dislocated ankle. In an interview with Vice's Dark Side of the Ring, New Jack talks casually about how he planned this in advance, and fellow wrestler The Sandman laughed as he recalled New Jack telling him that he planned to use a taser. In WWE, there's a story of tough enough rookie Daniel Puder, who the locker room decided went into business for himself on a 2004 episode of SmackDown, where he almost forced Kurt Angle to legitimately tap out in a shoot wrestling match. To give him his receipt, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Hardcore Holly delivered a vicious beatdown on Puder for several minutes in the 2005 Royal Rumble. And there's also JBL assaulting the Blue Meanie at One Night Stand 2005. Holly and JBL were allegedly kept in WWE as enforcers to keep the locker room in order. As recently as 2022, Kevin Owens accidentally ruptured Roman Reigns' eardrum at Survivor Series. So, reportedly in response, a few weeks later on SmackDown, Reigns hit KO with a lariat so hard, Owens' eye started to swell up. As tempting as it sometimes is, you can't punch your co-workers in other jobs, but in wrestling, receipts are acknowledged as part of the culture until an incident like Wilson and Riley makes the police and legal system take notice. Before we get into what happened with the case, there are a lot of words here like assault, prison, and violence in this video, so YouTube probably won't run any ads because of its controversial subject matter. That means we really rely on our viewers supporting us on Patreon to make these kinds of videos. Please go over to patreon.com/WrestleTalk, where you can support us from as little as $2 a month, with loads of bonus wrestling videos and retro pay-per-view reviews, and also an exclusive podcast with me and Dave Bradshaw, who researched this story, talking about the dark history of receipts in professional wrestling. When Riley's receipt to Wilson was reported, a normalized action in the wrestling industry was exposed to the scrutiny of real law and order. The incident, when investigated by the police, was intentional grievous bodily harm, along with compelling video and photographic evidence. Detective Constable Steve Davis, no relation to me, of Bournemouth CID, summed up the incident. James Riley subjected his victim to a violent assault that went far beyond anything that was appropriate within the parameters of the wrestling match. The victim has been left with injuries that have had a significant and lasting impact. But proving that in court would mean exploring what wrestling actually is, both as an art form and as a business with its own Wild West rules. Wrestling is a full contact performance where both participants have consented to the other simulating real violence against them, and there is a certain amount of risk that goes with that. Some moves are agreed to be laid in to make them look more realistic. Proving that your opponent went beyond what you had agreed and that they did so on purpose rather than by accident could be tough to demonstrate beyond all reasonable doubt. especially because when Riley was interviewed by the police under caution, he claimed he had aimed the kick at Wilson's chest, an accepted strong-style move in modern wrestling, either implying it was a mistake or that Wilson was at fault for being out of position. If he was more upright, the blow wouldn't have hit him in the face. After some delay, a trial date was finally agreed for the 25th of February 2021. If Riley was found guilty, it could be a landmark ruling in British law, setting a precedent that would guide decisions in future cases, meaning solicitors for victims of similar offences could be emboldened to push ahead with their own lawsuits. An existential crisis loomed over the industry. Would wrestling continue to govern itself in secret, or could those giving receipts be placed in front of the real world of solicitors, a jury, and judge? We weren't to find out this time, as in a shocking last-minute twist, Riley changed his plea to guilty just before the trial could begin. Perhaps his legal defense would have been undone by him admitting to the assault in text messages to Wilson in the days following their match, where in one exchange he reportedly confessed, "I acted like an animal," and that one of Wilson's own kicks earlier in the match had lit him up like a Christmas tree. Also, according to Wilson's friend, the one who filmed the footage of the match, Riley admitted the day after to his other trainees that he had kicked Mr. Wilson on purpose because Wilson had hit some nerve damage. Additionally, another witness who spoke to the police told a similar story of being punched in the face by Riley for real in a match prior to his bout with Wilson. On Monday, 29th of March 2021, James Riley was sentenced to 21 months in prison after admitting to inflicting grievous bodily harm upon Rob Wilson. The judge also imposed a 10-year restraining order against Riley, preventing him from contacting either Wilson or his family. During the sentencing, Judge Stephen Climey said to Riley, "During the course of the bout, which is largely a fictitious event in the sense that it is largely scripted, you suffered a significant degree of pain because of a pre-existing injury. Your reaction to that was to lose your temper and effectively take revenge. That revenge was a single blow with the foot. The consequences are dramatic. It is aggravated in part because you were the person in charge of this situation." By this point, Wilson had undergone several facial surgeries, was now suffering from PTSD, and had lost his job as a consequence of the assault. He said after the verdict, "He could have killed me, so I'm 100% glad he has been jailed. What happened to me was not a wrestling accident. It was not part of the show, it was assault. He took the conscious decision to hurt me. He betrayed the trust I placed in him, and he left me unrecognizable." For one of the first times in history, the receipt, a practice considered to just be a part of the pro wrestling business, was in fact criminal in the eyes of the UK law. In recent times, some in wrestling have tried to stamp out the practice of receipts without the need for legal intervention. On the 26th of August 2017, AAA wrestler Sexy Star seemingly tried to break her opponent Rosemary's arm at the Triple Mania 25 event. The incident sparked outrage from both fans and wrestlers, where many called for her to be blackballed. This included Cody Rhodes, who posted, "Sexy Star will never set foot in one of my locker rooms. I hope others follow suit." This was a major turnaround for the industry, which had mostly viewed such assaults as part of the job in the years prior. Now, with the case of Riley versus Wilson, with Riley being sent to prison, there is a legal precedent for anyone considering taking action against a receipt in the future, from the smallest indie show all the way to the biggest companies in the world. Please do help support us in making these videos by checking out our Patreon at patreon.com/WrestleTalk, where there's an exclusive podcast with me and Dave Bradshaw right now diving into wrestling's dark history of receipts. And also watch this other WrestleTalk original, The Fall of the McMahons. Here's a clip. America's greatest TV show of recent times is one of familial betrayal, corporate treachery, sexual scandal, and succession. I am, of course, talking about Monday Night Raw.